What's up, everybody? This is Brandon from Wealth Potion here, and the following is an adaptation of a 3-part essay that I wrote over the past few years, reflecting on my 10+ year career in sales and marketing. In my last video, I shared how I went from an introverted, shy kid to making over 6 figures in sales, one of the most extroverted career paths you could possibly imagine. And I spoke about how I intentionally chose sales as a career path to address my weaknesses. However, through that process, I also learned some very interesting things about sales. I learned that everyone in the world has a preconceived notion of sales that is frankly incorrect. And if understood properly, sales can be one of the most transformative skill sets you can learn for your professional career, but also for your life in general. In this video, in part 1, I'm going to talk about how sales is critical if you want to be an entrepreneur. If you want to start and run your own business, sales is fundamental to being an entrepreneur. In part 2, I'm going to expand that and talk about how sales is critical for all forms of human communication, including your romantic relationships, your friendships, your relationships with your parents, and so on. And in part 3, I'm going to take it even further, and I'm going to talk about how sales influences our own thoughts, our communication with ourselves, and ultimately frames and shapes our identity as human beings. As mentioned, this is part 1. We're going to talk about sales in entrepreneurship. And the 3 main points I want to communicate today about entrepreneurship is that 1, as an entrepreneur, you literally have to sell in many ways. Number 2, sales, like entrepreneurship, teaches you about having extreme accountability, being responsible for everything in your business. And last but not least, sales teaches you how to be obsessed with your customers and why that's so important, and why the most successful businesses are obsessed with their customers. It's a lot to cover. That's why I broke it into 3 parts. Today is all about sales in entrepreneurship. Let's dive in. The first thing we need to get out of the way before we even get into entrepreneurship and running your own business is unpacking some of the misconceptions that you might have about sales. In my last video, we did a bit of an imagination exercise. I asked you to imagine walking on to a used car lot, the smell of the pavement and the asphalt, the sweaty hot air, and of course, the used car salesman that walks towards you with his fake smile and his tight suit, ready to sell you something. Now, the reason I had us do that imagination exercise is because that is essentially most people's conception of sales. If you've never spent any time in a sales role, in a sales job, you probably feel like sales is kind of a bad thing. There are a lot of studies out there that show that most people associate the word sales with smarmy, slimy, tricksters, all these negative words about being tricked into buying something. But that could not be further from the truth. And to be honest, it's no surprise, because most people, their interactions with salespeople are door-to-door salesmen that are trying to sell them house painting or pest control products. Or it's telemarketers that are selling you air duct cleaning services. Or it's used car lots. And so most people, if they're not in a business-to-business sales environment, and quite frankly, most people aren't, then they are going to have largely negative experiences with sales reps. Now, I'm not going to be able to convince you in 1 video or even in 3 videos that sales is positive sum and that's a great thing for the world and for the economy. But all I ask for you to do is to set aside your misconceptions for a moment. Imagine just for now, for this video, that you've been living your life wearing a set of tinted glasses that has been influencing the way that you see sales. And all I ask is that you take off those glasses for a moment. Just hold back on your judgment and allow me to try to communicate some of the benefits of sales. All right, so now that we've gotten that out of the way, we can dive into sales for entrepreneurs. When you really think about it, the job of the salesperson is really quite simple. It's to bring in revenue for the business. And quite frankly, every business has a sales department. This camera that I'm filming this on, they have a sales department. The phone or the laptop that you're watching this on, that company, they have a sales department. You might not even believe it, but YouTube itself, the company within Google/Alphabet, they also have a sales department. companies that you might not even think sell anything have a sales department. How could this possibly be the case? Well, the first thing you need to learn about sales, and again, one of the first things I noticed when I entered my sales career, is that most of the time, job postings and titles don't just say sales because of these negative connotations that most people have. And so you start to see sales jobs hidden within these other words like account executive, account manager, business development is a big one, partnerships, customer success. These are all customer-facing roles where the person is selling to the customer, either to generate new business or to renew existing business. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. You're gonna see these everywhere. If you're anything like me before I went into sales, you're probably still resisting this idea. As I mentioned, we're just taking the glasses off. I'm not trying to convince you that sales is a good thing necessarily. If you are more interested in this topic, I'm happy to share more videos on it, but I would highly recommend this book by Daniel Pink. It's called To Sell is Human. Daniel Pink is more famous for his book called Drive, which you may have heard of, but To Sell is Human is really about this concept that sales is a lot more prevalent than you might think. The bottom line is this: every business has a sales department, a team of people that's generating revenue so that the business can make money. And as an entrepreneur, as the first person within the business, you are that sales department. You are that salesperson. And many entrepreneurs, whether you're starting a tech company or you're starting a different kind of business, a mom and pop's shop, you are responsible for sales. And so that's the first and most basic framing. Entrepreneurs literally have to sell the products and the services. But beyond that, they also have to sell in a couple different ways. They have to sell their early employees. They have to convince people that are gainfully employed, that have a 9-to-5 job in most cases, to leave their existing job and join their risky startup or new business venture. That requires sales. And by the way, many startups have multiple co-founders. What most people don't realize is that most startups start in one of the founders' head, and they have to sell the other co-founders to join that team. And so if you're an individual founder, you're probably selling to your co-founders. You also have to sell to investors if you're raising money for your business. To grok this a little better, Daniel Pink puts it really, really elegantly in the book, which is stop using the word selling and think of it as moving. You're moving people to agree with you in some way or to see things in a way that you see things. And that's ultimately what entrepreneurs have to do with their customers, their employees, their investors, and much, much more. All right, so that was the easy part. Entrepreneurs literally have to sell in order to make the business successful. But there's a deeper level here, so let's move on to point number 2, which is that sales teaches extreme accountability. When you think of the most successful entrepreneurs, whether that's Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, or whoever you think of when you hear the term entrepreneur, you likely think of the term visionary. They believe in a vision that is different from the reality we live in, and they believe in that vision to such a degree that they're able to rally people to come along for the ride, to help build that vision. And ultimately, that is only possible if the entrepreneur takes extreme accountability for everything going on in the business, everything that's going right and everything that's going wrong. As Simon Sinek says, leaders eat last. True leaders sacrifice themselves on behalf of the whole. That's what good leaders do. They take on the burden of something going wrong, even the smallest, most minute things. Sales teaches this. If you want to be a successful salesperson, you have to take control of everything in the sales cycle. It's actually quite funny. When I first went into sales, a lot of people talked about how sales is a really great career path because you have control over your destiny. It's kind of the saying like, oh, you have control over your destiny. And what they're referring to is as a salesperson, you can make more money because if you sell more, you get paid more commissions, and not many jobs are like that. However, the reality is kind of opposite because in other roles, you have full control over the work that you do. But in sales, you're convincing another person to buy something, and you can't ultimately determine what happens with that person. They are making that decision. Yes, of course, sales is about persuasion and convincing them and showing them the benefits of your products or services, but in a way, you actually have the least control of any job because at the end of the day, all of your work is partly in control by the buyer. The reason I share this is because the best salespeople, they are taught to make everything their fault. If your prospect did not show up to the meeting, that's on you. You should have sent a reminder email. You should have shown up 5 minutes early. You should have had a more compelling outreach, or your last meeting should have been more engaging so that they want to show up. This is ingrained into sales reps when they go through training and when they become more professional sales rep, is you have to be responsible for everything. In fact, in the world of sales, we often make analogies to the world of entrepreneurship. So as an example, a sales rep owns a book of business. So think of the sales rep and all of the people that they're speaking with at any given time. That is referred to as that sales rep's book of business. And that sales rep is responsible for everything in that business. They're responsible for following up, for selling, for closing. In enterprise sales teams, in fact, sales reps may have their own P&L. They may have employees or interns working for them. They might get a marketing budget to attend events. They basically are running their own little business within the broader company. And so it really is a microcosm of entrepreneurship. And a big part of that is owning everything. You are responsible for your book of business, period, end of story. And as you go into sales, if you start making excuses, oh, my prospect didn't show up, or they didn't have budget, or my contact went on vacation right when the deal was about to close, that is on you. And just like an entrepreneur has to take responsibility for everything in the business, so does the sales rep. All right, so we've talked about how entrepreneurs literally have to sell. We've talked about how both sales and entrepreneurship teach extreme accountability. Now, I realize at this point, I'm probably contributing to the misconceptions about sales being this like really bro-y, rah-rah kind of culture. Hopefully this third point will counteract a bit of that, because my third point is that both sales and entrepreneurship requires you to be customer obsessed. The absolute best salespeople, just like the absolute best companies, are obsessed with their customers. Now, I want to share this quick little story. I'll actually link the original video in the comments, but this is a very famous moment from the 1997 Worldwide Developer Conference. Steve Jobs is doing one of his famous talks to the audience, but what's special about this moment is this year, Apple had just shut down OpenDoc, which was a software framework that a lot of developers in the Apple ecosystem really loved. And in this video, a developer gets up on the mic and he's quite upset and he calls out Steve Jobs, and it's this tense moment. And Steve Jobs, he kind of gathers himself, but he says one of his all-time quotes.
One of the things I've always found is that you've got to start with the customer experience and work backwards to the technology. You can't start with the technology and try to figure out where you're going to try to sell it.
You have to start with the customer experience and work your way back to the technology. You cannot start with the technology and then try to figure out how to sell it. And that is a perfect analogy for entrepreneurship, but also for sales. In sales, you can't sell to everyone. You have to select who you're going to sell to. And in doing so, you have to find who are the best possible customers for my product or service. And early on in the sales process, we have this step that we call discovery. If you're not familiar with sales, then you probably never heard that term before, but it's quite simple. It basically means that as a sales rep, my job is to discover and really fully understand what my customer cares about, what problems they have, what keeps them up at night, what have they tried to do to solve those problems, how much are they willing to pay to have those problems solved, what would happen if they didn't solve those problems. I'm really trying to understand the customer, because if they don't have a problem that I can solve, then I shouldn't be selling to them at all. And it's that customer obsession that really separates the top sales reps from the average or below average sales rep. And when you look at entrepreneurship, if you look at some of the most successful companies that we have today, whether that's Elon Musk at Tesla and SpaceX, or Jeff Bezos at Amazon, or Gary Vee of VaynerMedia, they all have a very similar message, which is to be obsessed with your customers. Spend as much time as possible with them, understand what makes them tick, what they really care about, and your business will be successful. And just like your business will be successful, as a sales rep, you will also be successful. That's what the top sales reps recognize. They actually recognize that this discovery stage I talked about, it's not a discrete step in the sales process. It's something that happens all throughout the engagement with the customer. From the very first email or call that they make to that customer to not just selling them and closing the deal, but as you continue to build a relationship with them, continue to fulfill your services and upsell them and renew them, you are constantly trying to figure out what is happening with my customer. Are there problems being solved, or do they have new problems that need to be solved? So this is already a long video. As mentioned, this is part 1 of 3 parts. We've just touched on why sales is critical to entrepreneurship. Next up, we are going to talk about sales for all forms of human communication, romantic relationships, friendships, family, and so on. And then last but not least, in part 3, we are going to talk about how we communicate with ourselves, our thought patterns, and our identity. Hopefully, I've sold you just a little bit that sales is more than just used car salesmen and telemarketers, that it really can fundamentally change who we are as people, how we communicate with others, and how we communicate with ourselves. So that's it for today. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.